There it is. Okay, so then if you have questions, please enter them into the chat, and I will be monitoring them as we go, but we'll probably deal with the questions after John's finished. John can stay for some minutes after the presentation, and so if there's a discussion that begins, we can go past 5 o'clock quite comfortably. Usually Lisa is coming. She's on the road after dealing with her mum. Is there anything I've forgotten? Rory, John, anybody?
No, just a great pleasure to hear from John and all the amazing work that he's done in IB and for the campus. So.
Excellent. John, the screen is yours.
Thank you, one and all. Thank you, Rory. Thank you, Charles. And thank you to everybody who's attending today. And let me share my screen. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be talking about mentoring. And my comments are going to be based on nearly 30 years of work with students in the Biology Scholars Program. And I'm going to provide you with sort of some background information about the program. And I'm going to share with you some lessons around mentoring. I'm going to be talking about the definition of mentoring success, the types of support that we can provide students, also expectations. I'm going to provide you with an instrument that you might think about using with the students with whom you work to deal with role expectations, and also some of the ways to think about going from concept to practice. And finally, I'm going to be talking about help, because mentoring is critically important, for us all. And none of us can mentor effectively alone. And that's going to be one of the takeaways. And so let me just quickly tell you about the Biology Scholars Program. It's a program that I co-founded along with my colleague and friend, Caroline Kane, who's Professor Emerita in MCB. And long ago and far away, Caroline and I started BSP. And so here's just a quick sketch of the program. We started the program back in 1992. It's an undergraduate STEM E&I program, an equity and inclusion program. And there's a lot of discussion about DEI nowadays. And it's something that wasn't the frame that we used. We talked about diversity, but our thinking has been revised in terms of really thinking about equity and inclusion. We've learned a lot in the last 30 years, and we could talk about some of that in the Q&A. We've served over 3,600 Berkeley students over that time. And here's the breakdown of the students. 80% are first generation and or low income, 70% women, and 60% underrepresented ethnic minorities. And the approach that we've used over all these years is that we've developed talent. We take students that come in less well prepared to meet the demands, the expectations of the university in STEM, and we help develop talent. They do the work, we provide the environment. And this is the approach that we've taken to diversify STEM versus skimming individuals who are more ready to meet those expectations upon entry. In terms of success, some real intuitive metrics of success. Our students graduate with bio degrees and competitive GPAs, and competitive meaning 3.0 and above, equal to students who enter Berkeley more well prepared than them. And so we've closed this equity gap in terms of completion of a degree and being able to do something with that degree upon graduation, such as go to graduate school, medical school, whatever their choice. Another measure of success is what they do after they graduate. Many of our students are interested in going on to medical school. A number of them have become STEM faculty. A number of them have actually gone into policy. And so, we track our students, but tracking is one of the hardest things. And you know about that if you've ever tried to track students and provide that information to your funders. Very, very challenging. But our students have gone on to do amazing things with their STEM degrees. But the most important measure of success in my mind is that our students discover how best to express their passion for science. We don't say you must become a PhD. We don't discourage students from going to medical school. We don't say you have to become faculty. We help them discover their passion. And this is something that both Caroline and I have really been adamant about. We provide the environment and they grow in that environment and they follow the path that really does address who they are and how they want to express their passion for science. So mentoring, right before I came on, I Googled mentoring and I got 131 million responses to mentoring, an amazing amount of relevant information. And like all definitions, definitions really don't capture really the reality of any term. But here's a simple definition. Mentoring, to advise or train someone, especially a younger colleague or future colleague. I'm going to be thinking about, helping you think about the mentoring that we all do, and maybe in a critical way based on 30 years of work with the Biology Scholars Program. And so that's going to be the focus. And in fact, I said that BSP, I thought of as an E&I program. Some people call it a mentoring program. And in fact, mentoring to me is more than just having these formal mentor-mentee relationships, whether it be that you're assigned as a faculty member to an undergraduate in a program in order to help them develop as future scientists, or whether it be in a laboratory where you're the research mentor. I think of mentoring more broadly. When we advise, we mentor. It's not just about the courses somebody should be taking, but a lot of the messages that are embedded in the way we help. I also think about teaching as a form of mentoring. Again, all those messages that we embed in our teaching around efficacy, around the future use of information, about the responsibilities that are associated with scientific knowledge. So my definition of mentoring goes way beyond advising or training or teaching or maybe formally mentoring. I think it's important to consider context. Context is really, really important. And the undergraduate STEM education environment is the environment in which my 3,600 students and your students in your undergraduate courses are working in your laboratories. And so question is, what are students experiencing? I teach a course called IDS 96, and this is a course called, it's an introduction to the culture of the university and university science. And this fall, I did this exercise with students to really take a look at how they were experiencing the undergraduate STEM environment at Berkeley. And here is the exercise. Gave them this image from back in 2014, publication that maybe some of you are familiar with. And I said that this image is a commentary about undergraduate education at Cal. And I asked them to choose 3 words or short phrases that capture their own personal experience as a STEM major at Berkeley. And here's the word cloud that came from that. I shared this with the students just the other day, and it really does capture the mix of experience. Imposter syndrome, stress, competition, cutthroat, overwhelming, but also there is, there are glimmers of joy and hope, but a lot of it is very, very negative. And in fact, studies conducted by others indicate that that undergraduate STEM, the undergraduate STEM environment is not really conducive to student success, or maybe the success of some and maybe not others. There was also another exercise, another exercise that I do each fall. And this is a way for students to indicate where they find safety and support at Berkeley. And here are the instructions. Name 3 campus spaces that you would call a safe space based upon your personal experience on a scale of 1 to 4, very safe to very unsafe. Rate each of the following spaces below based upon your personal experience. And here are the choices that I give them. The Student Learning Center, the SLC, the Departmental Advising Office, STEM class office hours, financial aid, the EOP, that's the Educational Opportunity Program Office, discussion sections associated with STEM classes, and the STEM Research Lab. And I had them explain briefly what makes the space safe for them. And they always had the option of not responding. And here's a summary of what they said about unsafe and very unsafe spaces. I did a tally. And so, ranking at the bottom in terms of unsafeness, or maybe let's flip it, in terms of being very safe, is the EOP office. Of the 56 students that responded, none of them ranked this space as unsafe or very unsafe. In ascending order, the Student Learning Center, some found to be unsafe, and departmental advising, a higher percentage. And the financial aid office, really interesting, 48% found the financial aid office to be either unsafe or very unsafe. STEM office hours, over 50% of the respondents said that STEM office hours felt very unsafe or unsafe. STEM discussion sections, slightly higher, and the highest were research laboratories. Of the 15 individuals, 10 out of 15 found the research lab environment to be either unsafe or very unsafe. This is important information. This doesn't say that these spaces in an absolute sense are intrinsically unsafe, but this has been the experience of students. And I think the personal experience is important to capture if we're going to be working with our students as mentors, either as an advisor, as an instructor, in research. Very, very important. So BSP has gotten some remarkable results, and the question is, why has BSP worked? And a colleague of mine at UCSF, Mika Estrada, who's a social psychologist, recently completed a study to try to answer this question. It was a prospective study, which meant that we tracked nearly 400 BSP members over a 2-year period. And at particular time intervals of 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months, we asked the students a series of questions to assess a number of aspects of their experience. We call this the Gifted Forward study because we told them that this would help students who were following them. It would help those students because we were learning more about what's important about the BSP experience. Our working hypothesis was that BSP provides a safe space for the students that reduces the ambiguity about belonging in biology for its members. And here's what we found. The positive interactions with BSP staff, peers, the social events, the social environment, the interactions, the relationships helped members do the following. Increase their confidence in their ability to do science efficacy. It also helped them to see themselves as scientists, science identity. It also affirmed, or actually helped them affirm a commitment to the values of the scientific community, science values, and also together help them maintain their intentions to pursue a biology-related career, that is their persistence. All these aspects, all these findings really were consistent with why students persisted according to studies that Mika had done earlier. And most recently, we published our findings in the Cell Biology Education, and this came out in August of this year. So, what have I learned about mentoring? What I'm going to do right now is to share a few thoughts with you, and I'm going to leave plenty of time for a conversation. I'm going to talk about, what success looks like around mentoring. I'm going to talk about the various types of support that we can provide students in a mentoring relationship. Talk about role expectations, how to go from concept to practice based upon some of the research that's been done about effective communication, support, relationship building, and also talk about help, because mentoring is a challenging aspect of the work that we do. But I think one of the things that's really, really important to emphasize is that sometimes when people talk about mentoring, they talk about tools that can be used. That is, they talk about, for this sort of situation, you bring out this sort of approach. This is not a toolkit approach. It's not about having a particular tool when you see a problem and then fixing it. But instead, the way I think about the work that I've been doing with BSP students, this is a way to think about and ask questions about a situation so that in a sort of a co-constructive way, we can begin to figure out how to build relationships with our students and also come up with possibilities to help students deal with the challenges they face at Berkeley in STEM. And so in terms of outcomes, I really believe that one of the ways in which to really understand a complex process such as mentoring is to look at the endpoint. In other words, where we want to be and then to work backwards, sort of a reverse design. Some of the easily measured outcomes that we would like to see from productive mentoring exchanges, relationships, is varied depending upon who the student is. Research productivity, progress to a degree, good GPAs, postgraduate activities, and also, preparing students for a career. Those are easily measured. We can actually, do counts. But less easily measured are things like mental and cultural health. These are really hard to get a handle on. And these are really, really, as they turn out, to be really, really important considerations in terms of the persistence of students in STEM. And so these soft measures, these measures that we really can't necessarily do an easy count of, these are some important outcomes as well. So it's really about the chemistry and not just the science of mentoring that we need to keep in mind. This is a very, very important consideration. And this is the reason why I think that oftentimes the tool approach, although I am going to present to you a tool that you might want to use, but that tool has a lot of qualifications. Support. What types of support can we provide students in a mentoring relationship? And these are categories that others have come up with. And in fact, a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last 30 years, I started doing these things. Some of these things were relatively intuitive, and they were iterative in the sense that I would try them out, students would give me feedback, and I would modify these things. And I really didn't have names for them. And so I think one thing good about having done something for so long is that I found names for things names given by others who are experts in the field to the things that I've been doing. One type of support is instrumental support, where you connect students with resources, opportunities, you provide access, visibility, and sponsorship, which is very, very different than mentorship, where you actually go to bat for a student and actually go out of your way, maybe through letters of recommendation, but also introductions, maybe in situations such as at SOCNUS or ABERCAMS, other professional meetings. Another type of support, of course, is psychosocial, where you help students build their sense of competency, that they can do it, identity, that they really do belong, and efficacy, as a professional. These psychosocial types of support are critical. Also, the third type, the third category is relationship satisfaction. And this has to do with the trust that we build, the empathy, respect, connectedness, and sense of community. And again, these were things that over the years, I now understand that I've been doing through BSP. But just knowing these gives me a way of taking a look, maybe even more critically, at each of the components of the program. And I offer this to you because maybe you could take a look at what you're doing in different venues with your students, whether it be your laboratory, classroom, office hours, etc. Expectations. This is really a huge thing, and this is something that I continue to work on to this day in terms of making it clear in terms of role expectations. And the big question is, what is my responsibility? And this is both for the mentor as well as the mentee. What is my responsibility in this relationship? And this is about role expectations, which typically are not explicitly addressed, but there are a lot of assumptions that go into, or we enter these relationships with a lot of assumptions. That we have agreement, the assumption that we understand of what our roles are. And oftentimes when things go wrong, that's when we begin to understand that we may not have been on the same page. And I found an instrument, and I think some of you may be familiar with this, from a colleague of mine at Stanford, who really helps to address and align mentor and mentee expectations. And although I have not formally used it, and I'll show you at least a section of the instrument and talk about how it might be used or how my colleague intended it to be used, I've really kept this in mind. So this instrument that I'm about to show you provides a framework for a productive dialogue regarding expectations between mentor and mentee and the subsequent actions that can follow. So let me share with you that instrument. And I have given Charles a copy, which he can distribute to all of you after this workshop. And so this is about aligning expectations between mentor and mentee. And the author of this is Steve Lee, who's at Stanford University. And it's a questionnaire. It's a questionnaire that both mentor and mentee actually fill out. And once filled out, they can actually compare their responses to each of the items. And let me show you some of those items. Here's a statement. On the left side, in an ideal mentorship relationship, mentors should provide close supervision and guidance. Whereas at the other end of the continuum, in an ideal relationship, mentors should provide as much freedom and independence as possible for mentees to explore and learn themselves. In other words, how closely do we expect to be supervised? How closely do we supervise? What is the starting point for a conversation about what we expect? And this is about the nature of the relationship between mentor and mentee. On the left, a personal and friendly relationship between mentor and mentee is important. Whereas on the right, we see a professional relationship is advisable. Leave out the friend stuff. Let's keep it professional. So once again, mentor and mentee answer on a scale of 1 to 6, where they lie along that continuum. The mentor is responsible for emotional support and encouragement, whereas at the other end of the continuum, personal counseling and support are not the responsibility of the mentor. Where do we lie on that continuum? The mentor should decide how frequently to meet with a mentee, versus the mentee should decide when he or she wants to meet with the mentor, and on and on and on. And so the notion is that, and when Steve constructed this, and he of course attributes earlier versions to earlier authors, but it's for mentor and mentee to fill out these ahead of time, to get together and compare responses. And that's the beginning of the dialogue. Expectations. And so there are several caveats to this. The notion that identical scores on this inventory means that you see things identically. No, there may be different assumptions behind a common score. And so that is something that needs to be talked about. That's why the meeting is really important in the dialogue. This idea that there are no right answers is also something that really doesn't hold up, given that there's a power dynamic between mentor and mentee. The mentee may see how a mentor answers as being the right answer, and seeing something different than that as being the wrong answer. And of course, when we talk about developmental stages, how we respond to our expectations in a mentor-mentee role may change. One would hope it would change, at least in some ways, as we develop as professionals. And that goes for our students, but also ourselves, going from a junior faculty member to a senior faculty member. From concept to practice, here are a number of things that are critical to keep in mind. Cultural humility versus cultural competence. I think it's important for us to listen, learn, and get to know, versus assuming and generalizing and using the list about what individuals are like. This involves patience, time, and setting aside assumptions and really finding out the reality of our mentees, but also letting them know who we are. Growth mindset, and I think this whole idea of developing talent versus relying on this notion of brilliance, especially in STEM, this idea that people are either born or not born to do STEM. I think maintaining that growth mindset is really important, that given the right environment, talent can be developed. Now, of course, some people might say that's going to take a lot of time. And in terms of research productivity, that may slow down the progress of my laboratory. And so, you know, the real world constraints are there, but we're smart and we can figure out ways to develop talent and help students realize potential. Competition is something that many of our students, really, I think we need to redefine competition. There's communal competition versus individual competition. And for many of our students from underrepresented groups, competition on the individual side is a four-letter word, where one person wins and another one loses, the zero-sum notion. Many of our students want to win together as a group. And so I think the bottom line here is that good mentoring takes space and time. And time is one of our most limited commodities. And space in an already jam-packed life, it's very tough. But the space and time to develop talent, to help our mentees develop an academic identity that is consistent with personal identity, to not have the message be, mentee, leave your culture at the door because this is science. And to also develop towards a career that is intrinsically interesting, sorry about that, where individuals can actually make a living and actually have a positive impact on their world. And last but not least, help. Mentoring is a team sport, and that goes for both mentee as well as mentor. We can't do this alone. And the notion of multiple mentors is really, really important. I've called on many times, asked for advice from colleagues, sent students to offices with individuals that are more expert than myself at dealing with aspects of the student's development. And so I think we need to keep in mind that network of collaborators, and maybe even more to the point, critical friends who will really help us develop as mentors to better help our students. And so with that, let's have a conversation. Thank you. So why don't we open the floor, Charles? Are there any comments? Any questions? How do you want to handle this? Please, Rory.
John, so I would like to hear your comment on this, something that I always think plays a really important role, and that's from talking to BSP students that I've had the opportunity to mentor in the past. But it's sort of a two-part question. One is the provisioning of a safe space.
Yes.
And so you outline how you approach that in your questionnaire, but I know that BSP has its own approach to that, and how the extent to which you think that aspect, and of course with it comes the building of a social community and confidence, the role that plays.
Yes.
But then I would also really like to hear what you've done in the COVID situation where, I mean, I'll be open and honest myself. I was surprised how lonely I felt as a faculty member at home, stuck with my wife and kids. I missed my colleagues more than I ever actually thought I would. I missed bumping into them and hearing a little bit about what they were doing and just the chat.
Absolutely.
So I would love to hear strategies to make that better in the Zoom world, because I don't think Zoom is ever going to quite leave us. And so, you know, based on somebody who's really had to think about this, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, actually, we received a grant from Genentech to try and mitigate the impact of COVID on BIPOC students in our program. And so we went virtual, and we used the $400,000 from Genentech to redo BSP, to try and create, based upon what students were telling us, in a very similar way as you described, Rory. They felt isolated, they felt alone, they were hungry for community. And so we created all these spaces and opportunities for students to meet. In fact, as we found out, by creating these Zoom, using Zoom as a platform around workshops, around, for example, time management workshops, around stress-related workshops, around managing your money workshops, all those sorts of things, students actually began to enjoy that interaction because it was more convenient. They did not have to travel. They did not have to make a choice between, you know, having a meal at home and attending a workshop. And so I think we learned a lot about the upside of being in a Zoom environment. However, they do want that in-person contact. And so I think right now we're sort of doing this balancing act between the virtual and the in-person, and really trying to figure out what a healthy balance is. Because honestly, many of my students really, attendance went up in terms of workshops that we used to hold in person, but they also still want that personal face-to-face interaction or mask-to-mask interaction. That's what they want. And so, yeah, we've been working on this, and we had this 2-year grant from Genentech, and we found out a lot of very interesting things driven by student feedback. We're listening to our students, as we always have, and we're learning a lot about what to do differently.
So I've got a question for everybody. It's a procedural one. Is that typically I've turned off recording after the presentation, but I found the question and the answer is enormously informative and might be informative for anybody who couldn't make it today. And so my predilection is to keep the recording on, but I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. So does anybody have any strong feelings about this one way or the other? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I think if you do just private chat, Charles, so you don't have to open it up to everyone. Just private message, Charles or I.
That's good, Rory. Sure.
So
that's a good way. And if there's a single person who doesn't want to be recorded, we shouldn't record.
Yes. So if anybody, so just I'll try not to see whose name it is. Just if so I'm not getting any feedback yet.
I can tell you how to do a Google poll. Sorry. Reference from my last meeting.
Yeah.
We spent half a day figuring that out.
we can also go for a while with recording and then switch off.
Says, sure.
So I'm going to leave the recording on for now since I haven't received anything. And we have Annalise had a question in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then there's Tyrone and Amon. So Annalise, why don't you go?
Please. You're unmuted.
Thank you. You'd think we'd learn these things by now.
We all do it. We all do it.
I guess I just had the very practical question of, I was reading about the BSP program on the website, and it seems like an exciting thing to potentially draw students into our labs from the BSP program. And I was just wondering if you could address whether there are already sort of institutional ways to do that, or whether it would just sort of be the normal routes and some of the students who turn up happen to be in the BSP program.
I would just add that Annalise has just arrived on campus this semester, so brand new.
Yeah, so I don't know anything yet.
But it's helpful. All of us would like to know. So
sure. We've hired a research coordinator with Genentech money, and Emily King, who just finished her PhD in IB, is that research coordinator. You can actually email Emily. Why don't you give me an email and I'll introduce you to, if she doesn't already know you. Okay, I'm at Matsui at Berkeley. Okay, and I think that we have this formal program. It's called the Research Fellows Program. In the past, we've had the Biology Fellows Program and other versions for new to research students, but also experienced students. I think the best way is to work with us and to put out announcements and give us announcements for our newsletter if you have space in your lab. 80% of our students are low income and money matters. And so this money from Genentech has really been helpful to free up students to actually pursue science in the research lab, and which is really wonderful. We also have money from the Hellman Foundation to do that as well. So students will come with their own money, hopefully. And those who can't probably won't be able to do research unless we can find money elsewhere. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay, Annalise. Amen.
Hi, John. That was a really
Hi.
enjoyable talk.
Oh, thank you.
I was really curious about some of the things that you do in your course with the students. And I was just thinking specifically in regards to, I imagine that a lot of students come in potentially with imposter syndromes, or like they feel like their SAT scores aren't high enough, but really developing that growth mindset and realizing that, I mean, a lot of people had private tutors and all these things. Like, what are some of the approaches that you get to kind of switch the mentalities over to like, no, if you work hard, you can do it? I'd be really curious about your approaches then.
Yeah, I think part of the conventional wisdom is if you're smart enough and work hard enough, you're going to be successful. Okay. Students are working their butts off and they're not being successful, and they think they're therefore not smart enough. I mean, that's that. And to actually be explicit about that it's about starting points. It's about when did you have your last chemistry class? Should you be taking general chemistry along with Bio 1A, along with physics? So it's about helping students become system savvy and managing their interaction with Berkeley such that they can get the outcomes they want. But there's a lot of peer pressure to be a normal Berkeley student. In other words, 4 years, and to take a full 15 units or more in the first semester, to begin to do research right away. It's all those sorts of, it's part of the conventional wisdom. And when students get together in the dorms and they say, oh, you're only taking 13 units, you're already behind. Or you're not in a research lab yet, when in fact the student is in pre-calculus and pre-chemistry and is having to work a work-study job, and they're supposed to be in research on top of that. So it's kind of breaking this bubble about what a normal Berkeley student does. And I always say to them in the course, and because this is an interactive IDS course, where older students can actually tell younger students, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. I think in terms of source credibility, the older students are much more credible than this guy right here, who really doesn't know what it's like to be a student at Berkeley today. And so, yeah, those are some of the things that happen in the course. And really what the course is a collection of frequently asked questions that students in the program were asking me repeatedly. And so I just made a course, which in fact, the questions really haven't changed. And Berkeley hasn't changed. And the students are even more, I would say, than before. So they're career oriented and they're driven. And they're really, really aware that everybody's watching, especially now in this political climate, when people are being questioned about whether or not they belong in this country, and the space they're taking up that somebody else more deserving should be occupying, those sorts of things.
Thanks so
So
much.
there are two related questions in the chat.
Okay.
Ash's question is, and I'm going to make a little addendum if I can, Ash. John, for those of us working to start at other institutions,
Yes.
what if there isn't that money to create this space, these freedoms? What would you prioritize with low resources? A parallel might be when you began this program. And then Sarah Al-Shafi asks, it's wonderful you provide the funding. I'm curious about how you allocate it. Do you provide students with a stipend, conference, or research funding? And then what I want to do is an addendum, which is there are younger people here who are hopefully going to go to other institutions that might help transform them.
Yes.
What might they do to sort of begin to replicate, recognizing every institution is different, what you've done here?
Okay.
So that's a lot.
So, yeah, it is, and my memory is not that good, especially at 5 o'clock after a long day. But I think the most important thing, and I just don't say this is not a platitude, this is a reality. Students are the most important resource in the program. Students helping other students. Students as a resource to each other. Near peer mentoring. That is so critical. So even though you don't have a lot of money, you can create spaces where students can get together. But in that space, to make sure that the conventional wisdom like more is better, faster is better, you're only taking this number of units, you have to really help set the climate by saying it's not how fast, but how well, that we need to consider starting points. The playing field isn't level, so you may take a little longer to get to your eventual goal. There needs to be somebody who has that bigger view. Otherwise, students really begin to follow that conventional wisdom, which is so much a part of the STEM culture. It is part of this idea that it's just about ripping out the rear view mirror and just going. So I think all of that needs to be made explicit. There needs to be reinforcement of that climate in that space, older students working with younger students. And all of that can be done for the cost of pizza, cookies, a space. Those are it's really simple. It's a human thing. Okay, and the rest of it, around advising and so on. If students can help advise each other, but drift happens. Drift happens depending upon who's in the room. And I know the BSP program has drifted in various directions depending upon who is on staff, and also some of the sort of the influencers in the program, older students. And so, it's about monitoring to make sure that the program or this group isn't becoming like the rest of the campus. And I say that for those of you that are going to be going off to other institutions. It is so easy. The pressure to conform is great. Because STEM is king. STEM is king on most campuses. And the culture is very strong and the messages are very strong. And so, so that's one thing. What was another question?
I think that was the main one. The other one is just, given the money that you do have, how do you distribute it?
Yeah, we
For what?
It's a real, we want to get the biggest bang for our buck. We don't just invest in a few. We try to distribute the money so that it goes as far as it can with as many as possible, many students as possible.
And what's the money? What's the money? What's it for? Is it
research stipends? I think there's a little bit of equipment money. And there also is money to attend a conference. So that's how it's broken. It's sort of the standard REU, other sorts of, undergraduate research programs. Rory has had his hand up for a while. Okay, Rory.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make a comment. Oh, everybody's suddenly frozen. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, I think the VLSB Wi-Fi is playing up. This is based on some interactions I've had with grad students recently, and it was, we keep freezing, something I hadn't really thought about. But many of the things that John has said related to undergraduate students actually, to me, seem to apply to students who are arriving, graduate students who are arriving on campus for the first time. I was really surprised in the sense that many students who in particular come from smaller institutions or international students are overwhelmed when they suddenly arrive on campus and they have to figure out how to sign up for the gazillion courses that are on offer, and they're meant to enroll in teaching colloquium, and they're meant to get started for their research. And so in the same way that John sort of talks about BSP, I would really encourage peer-to-peer mentoring in the lab, and really thinking about students coming in from different backgrounds and how you can help make that first few months of their grad career successful and launch it. And this dovetails a little bit on some of the discussion we had at the end of this meeting last week. But in this particular case, it was a student that I know well, who came from a small Mexican university, and he just didn't know he had to sign up for all the courses, and then when he did, they were already full, and it was because no one explained the system. It was just a lack of knowledge of the system. So
Yeah.
I think that some of this transcends to the grad program as well as the undergrad program.
Others want to comment about that. Does that fit pretty much? Tyrone, you had your hand up earlier.
Oh,
What are your
yeah,
thoughts?
yeah. I was just going to ask, I wasn't surprised at the number of spaces that are meant to be helpful to undergraduates that they find unsafe. I was wondering if you had any insight into how you make those spaces feel more safe for students. Financial aid office, some of the other places that were listed.
Yeah, I think there's strength in numbers. You never go alone. You always have a witness about what happened. Yeah, I think that's very important. Including office hours.
Yeah.
Advising may be a little tougher, with professional staff. Yeah, I think that's the. When you think about low-income students going to a space that's supposed to be there to help them,
yeah,
but being made to feel stupid because you don't know the federal regs, like, shouldn't you know? No, that's why you're here, to help me. It's really amazing, and I didn't know that about financial aid. Yeah. But let me just say that, some of the labs that students tell me about are safe spaces. They are safe spaces. They're spaces where they feel like they don't have to leave their identity at the door in order to do science. And students talk, and students will share, like they do about instructors, which classes, you don't take classes, you take instructors. OChem is an OChem is an OChem. It depends on who's teaching. And so, the same thing with labs. So there is a network. And I think a critical mass of students who are sharing information, I think that's important. Although, one size does not fit all. What doesn't work for one may work for another in terms of, a lab match. So there's always that qualification as well.
I asked because I had my personal experience. I can certainly remember being an undergraduate and going to the financial aid office meant you were poor. It was like going to pick up food stamps, as far as I was concerned. It was going to office hours, which I never went to, or a discussion section meant that you needed help, and it meant to me, as a person of color in a majority institution, it meant admitting that I needed help, that I couldn't cut it. And so, how do you make those spaces? Again, I'm asking because I had the experience, but also I don't know how you make those spaces more. Well, how do you make BSP more? How do you make BSP a place that students don't feel like, oh, I'm going for the extra whatever? How do you attract students to BSP? And why can't other offices do that?
So is BSP a place for broken students, or is it a place where students can excel? Is it a place to fix individuals, or is it a place that gives you the competitive edge so that you can get into that summer program? I think it's about what students say about what their experience has been. And that's why the near-peer mentoring is really important. Students don't tell other students, to do this unless, they've had a good experience. And so that's the rep, I think, of students. It's not a remedial program. BSP is not. It's a place where your career can take off, where you can really do well. It is about the framing. It's about the language, but also it's about the reality. Students know when you're bullshitting them. They know. Yeah. Marta, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of the experience and information you've learned from your program. It sounds amazing. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
I'll try to be really quick. I know, like, I have a lot of ideas and opinions about things, but a
Sure.
couple of points that I have just working off of this like discussion of like these safe spaces. You talked about that during COVID, or like in the Zoom world, there was like this increase in attendance in workshops from students, which is like amazing, right? And I was like, just in my mind, it would be really interesting to kind of relate that, kind of like what sort of things were attendance increase in. Maybe there were decreased in lectures or in labs or during exams and quizzes and things like that. But relating that to, this word cloud, like I think like the idea of like there being a lot of stress and anxiety in like STEM in general. I mean, like, I wouldn't be surprised, or I would hypothesize, I guess, that students probably who are, like during like pandemic time when they're missing these social interactions are more inclined to participate and search out those interactions when they're low stress and not as demanding. And you can kind of have that sense of community rather than like, when you have to go there and it's just like, I don't want to go show up.
Yes.
So it's like a comfort thing. Anyways, just an idea. I thought that was cool. But then I wanted to ask the question about, as like we're talking about this, it comes to my mind, there seems to be this sort of like trade-off between time and resources, like, and quality of research seems to be at odds with like slowing down and focusing on these maybe less hard concepts. There's research and there's a really popular person. I don't know if anyone's heard of her. She's a social work researcher or scientist, Brene Brown, and she has this like great TED talk, and she talks about the importance of vulnerability and how when, and it seems to me that I've read a lot of her work, but that, like this idea of like community and connecting with people and really being vulnerable, whether it's discussions of increasing productivity at like, some tech company, or kind of like solving DEI issues in like UC Berkeley or anywhere else. It's just an idea that maybe in the long term, this slowing down or the reduction in productivity or seeming performance might actually, like it when you have a healthy sense of community and representation, equality, inclusivity, like in the long term, these things might actually improve. So I just wanted to sort of make that point. I don't know if I'm describing it clearly enough or if it makes sense for everyone. And then the last point I had was about this idea of where, like we talked about this at the end of the session last week, the idea of where the pressure is coming from that students are experiencing. Is it coming from their peers? Is it coming from graduate students scaring them into like doing really well and having research experience and publications before you even apply to graduate school? Is it, professors, and maybe it is partly our own perspective or coming from like our own mind or whatever, insecurities and stuff. But I think, I don't know, it's like, it seems to me that bridging, doing almost like the self-work of building your, like your confidence in yourself, whether you're a professor and you feel like you do belong here. You don't have to constantly be proving yourself that you are intelligent, capable, and have a lot to offer. To undergraduate students, being okay with making mistakes, knowing that they're learning. But it seems to me that it's like a very personal thing to like kind of like get to a healthy self perspective, so that then when you interact with people, whether they're at your level, peers, or otherwise, it can be constructive and helpful, and not this like perspective of like scarcity or like intense and unhealthy competition. There was a lot of words I just said, but I will clarify if anyone needs ideas, just some things that I was thinking about.
Marta, thank you. I think it's really important to know what we as individuals have control over, right, and are responsible for, and also what is beyond our immediate control. I think you were talking in the beginning about changing the culture of STEM, and that's a tough one. Okay, so what do you have control over within that culture? And I think one of the things that you have control over is finding individuals who are like-minded, creating a neighborhood within that larger STEM culture that is supportive. It could be either in a lab group that supports, that has similar thinkers as yourself, people who really see the some of the pathology of STEM culture. I also think that to acknowledge that some of the stressors are real and out of your control. Like first to college students, there's a lot hanging on, there's no safety net for a first to college low income student. They fall and there's nobody there to catch them. And they've given up a lot to be at the university. And I would say the stakes get higher, the higher up you go, because of the investment and also the that you've made, the sacrifices that not only you, but your family and friends have made for you to be there. And so, to acknowledge that, to say that this is that the stress is real. And I know first generation students are experiencing a lot of that, especially now during COVID, when internships and research opportunities are really hard to come by, and they've heard that you need to do this, and money matters because they need to pay the bills, and yet they can't find paid research or paid internships. And so those are real stressors for some, whereas others from more well-financed backgrounds, no, what's the big deal? I can just explore. So I guess what I'm saying is that, the points you've raised are really, really good points. When we talk about systemic change, a STEM is part of that system that where so much thinking about what success is baked in. So many practices that go along with that and reward that are baked in. But BSP is kind of like this island, as well as other islands, other research labs, other similar thinkers, and we know each other. And so really rely on your network, rely on your critical friends. Yeah.
Yeah, I was very intrigued. Jules Winters had to depart, but she writes in the chat, which is, thank you so much, John. Your work is always reinvigorating and inspiring. Looking forward to our department approaching the BSP way together towards creating approachable collaborative spaces throughout the department as well as in BSP. And I think that expresses an aspiration that's really powerful at the undergraduate level, at the graduate level, postdoctoral level. I'm going to turn the recording off now, but I'm not going to close the discussion.